Welcome to the Victorian Parents Council's VPC Live event. The Victorian Parents Council is a registered charity organisation dedicated to everyone who supports parents in educating their children. I'm Jackie Vandervelde, your host today. Good evening and welcome to our very first VPC Live. This is a bit of an experiment, so if we get it wrong, with the controls and so forth, bear with us. We're both just discussing that we've had quite an interesting and long day. So anything can and will and might happen, but we'll of course be extremely professional. So this is a bit of a treat really, because Amanda and I had a chat at the beginning of the year about starting strong at the beginning of the year, and I think we've both started our years with some of our blogs and some of our writing with 2020. Wow! So I should probably introduce myself. I'm Jackie Vandervelde, education consultant, and I do a fair bit of work and consultation work with the Victorian Parents Council. And I'm going to hand over to the lovely Amanda Lecaude to say hello and introduce herself.
Hi, thanks Jackie. Yes, Amanda Lecaude, and I'm an academic life coach with organising students based in Melbourne, but work with students across the country these days, primarily from Year 6 through to Year 12, and also with schools and parents as well.
Lovely. So Amanda, let's start this brave new world of learning from home. And as I said to you the other day, I don't often have a whole lot of praise for the Victorian government, but I actually kind of do this time around because they've actually said, here's the plan, here's what we're going to stick to, this is it. I'm not sure where they're at the moment, but I think there's the decision to learn from home, brave one, but also too, I think important in terms of getting some sort of stability for a plan for the rest of, at least for term 2. But I think it's really important for us to start to clarify some of the terminology. So in particular, what, we're saying homeschooling, learning from home, they really are quite different, aren't they?
Yeah, definitely. And it's one of the things that you'll see me whenever I comment or put anything on social media or what have you, I will not use the term homeschooling. And for me, I think there's a real big difference. And I think that sets the mindset up, I think, as well. And I know the media and everyone else are using the term homeschooling, I think, because it is generic. But basically for me, learning at home is really about kids still learning just like they would be at school with their current curriculum and their teachers, but via technology. That's really what learning at home, remote learning is. Whereas, homeschooling is really the parent's responsibility for the child's education with no involvement with the school whatsoever. So I think it's really important to distinguish that. And really, when it comes to home, to learning at home, parents need to be parents. They're not the teacher. And really, at the end of the day, and you and I have had this conversation quite a few times, that it's just about trying the best and doing the best they can.
And I think that's a really good distinction to make first up. And I think that, certainly homeschoolers, that they are registered, they go through a registration process, they are absolutely, developing a curriculum that is of their own choosing, whereas this to a certain extent, but the learning from home is all about following the direction from school with the material that is being provided by school, using the mechanisms that they've made available for for that communication. So I think now let's have a look at what do we think is the new normal.
Well, I think Jackie, it's different for most schools, and in the work that I do with students, I'm hearing lots of different ways this is actually working. And for the majority of kids, a fair chunk of them are still following timetables. Some of them are sort of left to their own devices, and there's a real mixture of ways that schools are doing this. And I think it's really important, I think, for parents just to really understand how their school's, working. And I guess to give, and that's what we're obviously talking about tonight, to give parents some tools and strategies around how it's working. But I think the one thing is, let's try and change the mindset. There's no point focusing on what happened at school and how it works at school and those sorts of things. But, open our minds up to, this new platform, whether it be easy or not. And I appreciate for lots of parents it isn't. And for students, a lot of the students I'm speaking to, it's taking quite a bit of time to get used to as well.
Sure. And I think that's a nice little segue then into talking about mindset. You and I have talked a lot about this, so I'm interested. I'll let you run with it first, because I probably come at it from a slightly different angle.
Well, I think, again, I talk about it too. Mindset's very important to a student's learning. And one of the biggest things is, obviously, we want children to have a growth mindset rather than a fixed mindset, and be adaptive and open to change and open to learning, and rather than, it's too hard, I can't do it, and, some of those negative connotations. But one of the biggest things, the biggest predictor of a child's mindset is their parents' mindset about failure, which I just think is amazing. And one of the things that I guess I tell parents to focus on in particular is focus on the process rather than the outcome. So, this is how it assists children with their learning and obviously, in hopefully achieving the marks we want them to get. But, rather than focus on grades, accomplishment, intelligence, ability, let's focus on the learning, the effort, the work ethic, the improvement, those sorts of things.
Look, and I really like that, and I think that one of the I suppose the bit that I will add will be really around what do parents, more can parents bring to this, and we're very much, as parents, we're models for our children, so that if we are demonstrating in culture, nurturing a culture and an optimistic mindset, what does that mean and what does that look like? And I think that the very first thing is that what it isn't rose-coloured glasses. So I think that this situation is tough. I mean, there's no two ways about it. I think some families will go through this, will sail through this period of learning from home, and I'm sure it'll be different, but they'll come out of it, well. Others are clearly going to struggle for a whole variety of reasons, and that's not because they're lacking in parenting skills or anything like that. It's just it's tough. So how we think, how we act, how we view, etc., is really going to determine our mindset. And I think that the important thing here for me is to remember other tough times that you've been through as a family or as a parent, and how did you get through those? So think about those that helped you get through those tough times, so that you can then draw on those strengths again in this particular time. But also I think it's to be adapt to optimism in a certain sense, is to view this situation as a temporary situation. I think there'll be things that certainly will be changed, after this, and I hope they change too. I'm actually looking at this as quite an opportunity, to be perfectly honest. But I think it's certainly temporary, and it's very specific too. So it's not like, while it might be touching on different parts, or lots of different parts of our lives, it's a very specific incident, and there's lots that we can learn from this particular time.
I think you're right, Jackie. I think, it's about being adaptive, and that's a great skill for anyone to have, and adapt to the situation. And I appreciate that we have to keep changing at times to continue with whatever's happening at the time. And, whether it be going back to school, part-time, or whether it be going back to school, just year 12s to start with, or one day a week like what's happening in New South Wales, we're going to have to all be adaptive as to how that happens. But one thing I guess I want to highlight in particular is the fact that this is unknown for everybody. This is not something that anyone really has the answers to. And, the government, the schools, the teachers, parents, students, we're all navigating this for the very first time. And one of the things that I'm very big on in particular is thanking teachers in particular, because I think the amount of work and effort that they have put in to get our kids still learning and learning from home. And obviously, you know, we're both parents, and we can attest to that from a parent point of view, as well as, you know, what we do in our businesses. But I think, you know, the main thing is we all need to work together and be supportive of one another through this journey.
You're right, and that really speaks to the point about agency as well, is that, you know, parents can make a difference in this situation. So, you know, that's also part of that optimistic outlook, and I think that's an incredibly important, you know, role for parents, is to have that optimistic mindset, because it will be passed on to their children. So what challenges, I'll ask you first, Amanda, what challenges are you seeing or hearing about from the students and families you're working with?
Well, it's very interesting, because, to be honest, I'm hearing more positives than I am actually challenges. Now, there's definitely challenges by all means, you know, and I think most kids, you know, the fact they're getting used to the process, they're getting used to the amount of work. Some are finding a lot more work than perhaps they had when they're at school. Now, that is a challenge, and that is a challenge that I'm encouraging students to speak to their teachers about. Some of them are saying to me they reckon they're getting more work than they were when they were at, you know, when they're in the school and the classroom. So it's important, and I've had communication with some teachers around that today as well. And I think they can't gauge that, you know, it is harder for them to gauge, you know, how much work to give students. So that's where it's really important for parents to, I guess, work with their children to speak to their teachers and encourage them, you know, to do so. Likewise, to be honest, I've actually been in touch with the school because I feel one of my children actually needs more work. So I've gone the other way, and, you know, he's racing through it, and I don't know if that's, you know, I can't gauge that either. So I've been in touch with the school about that, and they've been, you know, again, I cannot thank them highly enough. I think they're just so communicative and helpful. But in terms of some of the other challenges, you know, I've been dealing with a lot of Year 12s, obviously, and they're probably the biggest group that I feel for at this time. You know, there's a lot of social change, a lot of, you know, they're missing out on the lasts of their athletics carnivals and their swimming carnivals and their, you know, all sorts of different activities, and that's tough. But, you know, motivation is probably one of the big things that a lot of those kids are struggling with. And I guess until we get outcomes as to what's happening around their assessment, that is a little bit tough. But having said that, I don't think they'll be, you know, put out to dry. I think they will be well looked after. They're all in the same boat. And again, whatever will be around that. And then, you know, as I said, most of them are positive, because really a lot of kids are saying to me that they're more focused. There's not the distractions of what happens in the class. You know, they get through the teacher can communicate the work better, then they can get their work done, you know, quicker. You know, a lot of them are loving the fact they don't have to get up. They can get up literally just before they have to get online. You know, they don't have to wear school uniform. So there's a whole lot of those sorts of things coming out, which, you know, is good to see.
It is good to see. And I think that one, you know, little anecdote from my world is we were all, you know, trying to support the local cafe still. So you go down and collect your mail and get your coffee, and we're all standing, you know, 2 metres apart. And there's a batch of dads, you know, down the group of dads who've all brought their kids out to have a bit of a morning tea break and get coffee and mail and a few essentials from the local shop. And it's been really interesting, the coffee queue conversation, where we've finished all of it, mainly primary, okay, so these are mainly primary students. We've finished all of our work by lunchtime. The school work, we've finished the school day. And that's just and they're going, what are you doing with them? So there's that challenge where, you know, there's some real struggles going on with, you know, parents feeling that they've got to get through every single piece of this work, and
they don't.
And perhaps some more guidance from teachers. And so I think your comments about feeding back to the school and saying, you know, help here, what's essential and what isn't, I think that's an important point. But also too, we're racing through this. We seem to be getting through everything really quickly. Is that okay? And then the questions are arising. What are they doing the rest of the time at school if we're getting through this now? But you're right. The dynamic is such that they don't have the distractions. And there's a whole lot of other stuff that goes on at school too that that takes up the day. So it's just been really interesting. I think that there'll be that flow on of, okay, some adjustments about what's essential and what isn't essential, and what do you really need to concentrate on, and what can what is optional, in the sense that if we're all a bit tired and fractious, you can let that little piece go. That's not a big deal.
Jackie, one of the other challenges that I've just thought of, which is probably one of the most significant ones, is depending on how schools are functioning. So for the majority, or not majority, a fair chunk of my students, I guess, are operating to a normal school timetable. And I think that's fantastic. Their teachers might be involved at the start of the lesson, they might be involved the whole lesson, they might come in at the start and the end, whatever. But students have got a structure and a routine and a plan. And I think that's really important. Where some of my other students, they're given work at the start of the week, they're sort of, checking in with the teachers a little bit, but they're pretty well left to their own devices. Now, I think it's really important that these kids have some sort of routine and structure, that they have a roadmap to follow, because otherwise it becomes really hard. And I think even for families, like you were saying, these primary school kids, it's still important for families to have some form of routine and structure in place, and to let kids know, sort of the timetable and bits and pieces as well, because we all generally work much better under that sort of structure.
That's so true. And for people who are listening tonight, Amanda and I have both written different blogs and pieces in the last couple of weeks about exactly this. And so we will be publishing an ebook together to go along with the recording of this webinar, or this VPC Live, so that you can see what our thinking is around that in terms of some recommendations, so that you'll find that quite useful. I think another challenge that I'm hearing about is, the sharing of technology resources at home, which, so we've got, maybe one, maybe two or more children who all need to be on devices. We've got mum and dad and possibly older, some older children who might be at university or also working, all at home, juggling the whole IT situation. And sometimes there's not devices for everybody, so there needs to be some sort of sharing of the devices around the family. That's a big issue that I think we've all got to wrestle with. But one of the things that was suggested to me was to actually go back to the school and say, well, here's our family timetable. Here's what I'm dealing with at home in terms of how we have to share our resources. So I just need you to be aware of that, so that there's not that unrealistic expectation.
Yeah, and again, talk to them about what are the key things. I had a student tonight who's on the spectrum. She's got lots of learning challenges, and it's a real struggle for her and her mother to sit there and do these online classes. And, while she's online, she's fine. But the minute she gets off, there's massive meltdowns and there's lots going on. And, my advice to her today was to talk to the school and find out which ones of those lessons are more priority, so that we can focus in on those for now and perhaps ease off on the other. So, it's all about adjustment and doing what works for you and your family and your situation.
Exactly. And not everything is online. So there should be, a pretty good amount of activity and learning that's occurring that does not require screen time as well. So, that's something that we've spoken about at length over several conversations before, but actually making sure that there is that time in that break. So talking now about parent roles and teacher roles, because I think we sort of alluded to it at the beginning, but I think it's actually important now to sort of talk about who does what.
Yeah, well, I think, the schools are obviously setting the tasks. They're setting the work. Now, there's a whole lot of different, aspects and things that go on here. And I mean, if I'm talking about probably secondary school kids just for a moment, this is all happening. We don't know sometimes as parents if this is actually happening. So, my children sit in separate rooms to where I'm sitting. My husband sits in another room. We're presuming they're online. We're presuming they're doing what they're doing. So again, it's important to communicate, and schools to communicate that, to parents. I've got some students that are struggling to get online all the time as well. So it's trying to, find out, the schools are trying to keep in touch and keep those kids engaged. And the most important message that I think is really important is that kids are just still engaged with their school and school community and learning more than necessarily actually doing the work as such right this moment.
That's right. And I think, parents are parents, teachers are teachers, and I think that, you've still got to, as parents, you've still got to keep relationships intact as well.
Number one, definitely.
So, beyond this, you're still going to be mum and dad. So it's important to, to continue to be mum and dad and not take the role of the teacher from that point of view. And I'd sort of liken it to parents being a coach. So coaches coach, they don't play the game. They know the game. They may have played the game in the past, but they're not actually playing the game now. So they're the ones bringing all of their experience to supporting, the team players. So I think that's a nice analogy, just to remember that to breathe. There are other people doing this as well, but it's important to remain mum and dad, because that relationship with your children is far too important.
Yeah, that's what I say as well. It's number one, and it goes on beyond this. It's going to go, you want it to go on for a lot longer. But I think the other thing that's really important is to, recognise we're all going to have good days, we're all going to have bad days. And I mean, even doing what I do and working with students, I've had some challenges with, a couple of times with my children, and, again, I just communicated with the school about it, because I was at a loss to what can I get my child to do. And as I said, I've got all the tools and strategies, and, I know everything in that sense, and work with lots of students on this. But again, they listen to me because I'm not their parent, whereas I am a parent in this situation, and I have to, pick the battles and so forth as well. So, keep you in touch with the school. And, another parent even rang me the other day and said that she had their day just went haywire, and they didn't get all the tasks done and so forth. And I said, this is a primary school student. And I said, that's okay. Like, don't worry about it. Like, it's not going to be crucial to their learning. If you don't get through everything every day that the teachers have assigned, no one's going to look back in, 10, 15 years' time that they missed, a couple of lessons here and there.
That's right. And in a regular day at school, that would happen as well. Having been, you and I having both been teachers at some point, we know there are good days, and there are certainly days where not a lot happens. Not a lot can happen as well, depending on what's going on. So, Amanda, the unknowns. What don't we know? We don't know what we don't know, but what don't we know now?
Well, I guess there's a lot we don't know, and for me at the moment, I think we just have to trust our government that that they're doing the right thing. I think the challenge, and as you said, you said you liked, the Victorian government at the moment with what they're doing with schools. I personally think it's good too, because the last thing we want is all our kids to go back to school in 2 weeks' time, and then finally have to pull them all home again in, another week after that. So I think, that's a hard one to juggle, and no one knows the answers to this. We still don't even quite know what's going on with this COVID-19, and how it's manifesting and where it's manifesting and what we can do. So I think there's a lot of unknowns still, and we just have to, do the best that we can.
I agree. It's all still very fluid. But what I think is really interesting in this is that we've already done the learning from home. So if we have to come back to this at some point, we've already got a roadmap to how it's going to work. So I think there's a lot of capability and competence has been developed, which has been useful. So we know that it won't be forever. It'll be different. I don't think we're ever going to see something. I don't think we're going to go back to the way it was. Yeah. I think some people wishing that we could, but I'm not certain that we're going to be necessarily doing that anytime soon.
Yeah.
And essentially, I'm not necessarily sure that we'd want to entirely. I think there are going to be some really interesting changes.
Yeah, I think that the key message around that is to keep, for parents in particular, is to keep talking to their children and highlighting the fact that this won't be forever, that, you know, they will go back to school at some point in time. You know, as I said, who knows when that might be, but that is the message. Now, I know I've got some students who will really struggle with that. You know, they're actually loving this learning at home, particularly some of those kids who have learning difficulties and challenges. So, you know, already we are continuing to make sure we do definitely talk to them about that, and that, you know, they'll be okay about going back to school and some of those things. So I think that is a really important message to get out there. Now, you know, again, some might not, and some might have to look at distance ed and other, you know, and other options, or schools, as you said before, you know, maybe schools, you know, might open up the way they do things a little bit differently. So, but again, they're all unknowns too. So we don't know, do we?
Exactly right. So I think people are probably finding at this point that they've got a little bit of extra time in the day, or that their children appear to be racing through the work, or perhaps not as engaged with the work, and they seem to be sort of at loose ends a little bit. So what sort of suggestions have you come up with that would be still learning and probably stimulating the brain and keeping things in a more formal educative sense, but are still things that can be done from home?
Well, I think there's a lot about still developing, you know, kids' independence and helping out in the home. You know, one of the questions I often ask students when I first meet them is, what do you do, you know, in terms of helping out at home? What chores do you do? And it amazes me sometimes how some kids don't do very much at all. So I think right from a young age, you know, it doesn't matter what age these kids are, you know, they can be helping out, you know, obviously age appropriate, but helping out around the home. So I know even my, you know, my children, you know, last week I was very busy and I got to the point where I was trying to cook dinner and I had students and I had something else on that evening and there was lots going on. And it's like, come on, guys, you've got to help out here. I cannot, you know, manage all of this. But the one message, I guess, around, you know, if we help getting our kids to help out, if they don't know how to do something, show them how to do it. Do it, or, you know, show them how to do it with them, and then step back and watch them do it. So we're giving them the scaffolding along the way to be able to do these things ultimately by themselves. And these are things that are going to help them, you know, in years to come. You know, knowing how to cook, knowing how to clean.
Exactly. And, you know, and well, we've had conversations before about, you know, I think I said, you know, we're not raising children, we're raising adults. So there's a lot of skill that needs to be passed on, that really parents are the only ones who can really do that effectively. So
Yeah, but I think there's other things too. It doesn't have to be all chore based. You know what I mean? There's lots of fun things, as you know. There's, you know, they can be cooking, you know, learning things like that. You know, I'm encouraging mine to get out every day, doing some form of exercise, which I think is going to be hard in the next couple of days because the weather's going to be a bit challenging. But, you know, and the other one is, you know, keeping in touch with their mates, I think, is so important. And whilst as parents we're struggling, a lot of us are struggling with that because it's technology based primarily, you know, gaming, social media and those things. I think we still have to have our routines and our guidance in place around that, but we probably need to relax it a little bit at the moment as well.
yeah, exactly. And not everything needs to be Netflix. Although, can I just say, I think I've binged myself significantly over the last couple of weeks. There's stuff that I thought, oh, I can't remember I ever saw this movie, and I've been watching, you know, catching up on all of that. But also, too, it's a great opportunity for wider reading too. There are time. This is a good time now for that. And I remember, you know, at the time my kids were going through, my children were going through school, and there were quite challenging novels and things that they were reading, but there were audiobooks, so they could actually have the audiobook, listening to that and following the text at the same time. And that can be a really, if you've got you know, a young person who is a bit challenged with reading sometimes, not necessarily they're not readers, but they just find those larger texts a little bit difficult, that's actually a good way of getting through them as well.
Yeah, one of my students actually talked exactly about that. I asked her what she did in the holidays and did she read her novel that she was meant to be reading? And she said exactly that. She got the audio book and she had the book in front of her, and yes, she read it.
And that's great. Any way to get you through, I'm all for it. So, well-being, I think this is probably the big, I mean, our schools are very concerned about it and have been coming up with amazing ways of checking in with children. But in a lot of ways, I mean, parents really are the guardians at home for this sort of thing. So, some well-being tips from your point of view.
One of the things that I think, as parents, and I talk about this sometimes in my workshops, is that don't just assume everything's okay. You don't hear anything. And we tend to, as parents, we tend to assume, oh, well, there's nothing, no one's saying anything, we're fine. I think it's still very important to check in with your kids, on this journey. And again, not hassle them. That's not what I'm saying, but just check in and just perhaps ask a couple of questions. And are you okay? And what's working for you at the moment? What's not working for you? And don't put words in their mouth, but just check in from time to time and not just assume.
I agree. And I think too, parents need to be watching their own well-being at this time, because I think that there's certainly, stresses and strains on uh, their role. Plus, they're probably, they may have lost work too.
Yep, definitely.
Home have lost work. They've been stood down, or no longer not earning as much if everyone's had to take a bit of a haircut. And also too, if you are working from home, you're juggling all of the the school, the work, the everything else that goes on in a home. So parent wellbeing is actually really critical at this point too. And I think that we probably need to reassess what it is that we do to boost our wellbeing, because a lot of what we do for wellbeing is outside of the home normally, and now that's not as available to us. So if we were exercising, with gym classes or exercise classes that had a bit of a social, social element to it as well, that's no longer happening.
I'm actually very lucky there, Jackie, that my gym has gone online and I'm set up in my living room, and we still have the banter with live sessions. So, but that's not the norm. I get that.
I did see a funny meme yesterday that said 87% of gym members don't realise that their gym is actually closed. So, which is probably, unfortunately, is probably pretty true. But I think it actually gives us a really good opportunity to have these conversations with our children about what is actually important for wellbeing and for happiness.
Yep.
One of the things that we know, the way in which our brains make sense of these things is actually reference points. And I was doing a bit of reading about this a couple of weeks back. We make a lot of sense of the world by comparing ourselves with others. And so now we're not out in the world to see, who's got what and keeping up with the Joneses. It's actually a really good time to sort of sit back and reflect and say, well, again, like we've been saying earlier, what is essential? Do we need to have all of these things? Are we, can I delay that purchase? Can I delay that, that activity, and reflect more on relationships, because it is actually relationships and those experiences that we have with people that actually are going to build our well-being and our happiness significantly.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, the other key thing that's really important is, I think, obviously getting kids out, still doing some form of walking, running, exercise, particularly those kids who were very active, have had all their sports pulled out from under them. And can't do those, in a team sense, that they can still, do something to feel good and get some fresh air, and again, just get away from those screens. It's really interesting, because some of the students that I'm hearing from are saying there's too much screen time, which sometimes you would think as a parent, oh wow, I don't think I would ever hear my child say that. But other parents are saying to me, yeah, their kids are, whilst in the early stages, they're probably spending, 24/7 literally on screens over the school holidays and things. But now that they're sort of settling into a routine, I know kids are going back to reading, and kids are playing board games, and, they are looking for other things, I think, sometimes to do around that.
I don't think our dog's ever been walked quite as much as he has been.
I agree.
He flops on the couch. He hears the rattle of the lead and goes, no, 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 not again, not again. But certainly, yeah. Look, I think that exercise is actually really critical for for our kids and for ourselves as well. But also to just having downtime. It's actually extremely exhausting being together all the time.
Yeah.
So having spaces where people can just go and be on their own for a little bit is actually really important. And having time, just sort of downtime to process thinking,
Yep.
to process the learning that they might have had during the day is actually really important for well-being as well.
Oh, definitely. And I know I'm a morning person, and I was trying to adjust my gym. Like the gym sessions aren't early in the morning anymore, and they're in the middle of the day. And I was trying to do them live, and it's like, no, I've gone back to my normal, doing them not live. Early day start, and that's my time. And it always has been my time. I'm up at 5:30, and no one's awake at that point. So I still cherish having that time on my own, like you said, away from everyone. I mean, my whole life's changed in the sense that I worked from home, and it was just me. Now, my husband was coming to work from home anyway because his office was renovating, so he's now home. And yeah, as you said, now I've got the children home as well. So that's a completely different routine and structure to what I'm used to, and having no one else to have to worry about during the day.
I know. Oh, there was a queue at the coffee machine today. I was appalled.
Exactly, when you're not used to it. So that's a challenge for lots of parents, as well, trying to juggle all sorts of different things.
That's right. Let's sort of move on now to where to from here.
Well, I think, there's something I actually, wrote down, and I ran a session similar to this about 2 weeks ago, and I worked with a lady by the name of Kate Fitzsimmons, who's a resilience coach. And one of the key messages that she talked about is, we'll figure it out. And I really liked that terminology. And I'm just going to read some information about that, because I just think it's really key to what we're talking about. We'll figure it out. And these words help to settle the brain when it wants to run away to the potential threats of the future. It helps to focus it back on what it can control, and that it isn't whether the problem happens, but your ability to overcome it. To solve it, to work around it or through it. So this helps remind your kids that everything is figure-outable, which I thought was a really good term. This is the most powerful and reassuring thing you can do for them right now. And I thought, yeah, we'll figure it out together. We don't know all the answers. We don't have, know exactly what's going to happen tomorrow or next week or in 6 months' time. But at least, it gives us something to work towards.
Oh, look, I agree. And I think one of the, I've got a sort of few points on that as well. I love that it's figure-outable. That's awesome. But my advice in this sort of time is to slow down. And I know that that's kind of being enforced, but to actually take time to enjoy being slow and appreciate being slow.
Yep.
When I set out this morning, to have my cup of tea early, because I'm up early as well on my own, it was actually, the silence was beautiful. It was beautiful. So, but I think too, we're not expected to do as much. I'm not racing around, in the car, picking this up, doing that. I've actually slowed right down, and it has actually been very good. So I'm appreciating the slow. So where to from here? I want to be able to harness the slow. That's and keep that, at particular times. I think too, what's important for where to from here is to recall the good times. So there are some good things that have happened to us in the past. There are good things that are happening now, even in the interesting times. They say interesting times, unusual times. I think someone made a poem up of all the lines of emails that they received, and it said unusual times, different times, uncertain times. But but think about those things that were really where you had good feelings about particular events. So maybe it was the board game, maybe it was that moment of learning that you shared, that light bulb moment that you shared with your child, where you could actually see that something had sparked for them, and remember how that felt together and recall that is important. I think too, expressing gratitude. It might only be something small in the day, like that little quiet 5 minutes on your own. But it's something, that you can say thank you for, and also to encourage that conversation with your children at this time. There is some good stuff that's coming out of this. And I think too, again, resetting comparisons, looking at relationships and what's important in those relationships. And delaying all of those non-essential purchases, which is kind of easy at the moment because we can't go out and actually look. but delaying gratification on a lot of these things is actually a really useful exercise too. And that would be my where to from here that I would have to be encouraging people to think about. So we're coming up to sort of looking at some questions, some Q&A. And so I think we had some come through in the email from people registering. But whoever's on, if you would like to at this point, use the chat function to type away any questions that you have, and bearing in mind that Amanda and I are experts in Victorian education tonight, but if there is a question that comes up from another state, I'll chance an answer for New South Wales. But if there's anything that does come up that we're not able to answer tonight, we will take your questions on board and produce an answer in the Q&A part of the ebook. So our first question, I'm going to read out the first one and we'll go from there.
Will missing term 2 have an impact on those children currently in grade 6 pertaining to the transition to high school? And I guess, this is a key area of where I set my business up in relation to working with students was and is still the focus is between transition from primary to secondary school. So I feel quite, sort of qualified to sort of answer that question. And I think not at this stage. I don't think it will impact at this moment if they don't go back to school for term 2. Where I think it might have an impact is if this drags on and, for instance, they didn't go back to school for the rest of the year. Then we have the challenges of, again, the fact that they haven't, they haven't finished, something off and then starting a new thing. But to be honest, year 6 is pretty much usually a holding pattern. For a lot of kids. A lot of kids get to that point where they are ready to move on. It's a bit like the whole, childcare, move into primary school as well. Kids get to a point where they're ready and they're more than capable. Some schools, obviously work with their kids on assisting them, with transition and giving them some more tools around it. But if they don't get those now, lots of secondary schools are very good at equipping these kids with these tools too. So at this moment, I think, yeah, okay, but let's, if it drags on, then maybe that's a different story. But, keep in touch because that'll be something that I'm clearly focusing on and working on and we'll be supporting children through that, whatever it may be.
And we might jump back on another VPC live and have a discussion about transition. I mean, that's an area too that I also work in, and I'd be saying, that the schools are very well aware of transition and what makes a successful transition, and the way in which they work with families and the students to get them ready to move into high school. This cohort will have, their experiences that they had over term 2 or for however long this goes for, woven into that transition process. So I don't think it's something that you need to be overly concerned about, to be honest, because I do believe that schools do an amazing job with transition generally, from primary into secondary school. And it is about familiarity, making sure that they know the basic things of where to find how to find their way around the school, that type of thing.
Yeah.
In terms of knowledge and content, there might be some areas that need some assistance, but generally speaking, they do it extremely well. So I would agree with you, Amanda. I don't think it's anything that people need to be too concerned about at this stage. We had a question. The next question, I think, was from a teacher. The principal wants me to Google Meet with groups of students 5 times in the day. Is this too much? Feedback is time consuming. I think that was from a teacher. So, look, I work in, part of the work I do is in instructional design. I think that probably, 5 Google Meets or 5 video calls replacing like-for-like classes was probably okay in the first couple of weeks as we were winding down from the end of term 1, while we were trying to sort out what learning from home would look like from a school perspective. I do think that is extremely exhausting for everybody, students and teachers alike, if you maintain that replacing your classroom experience with an online Google Hangout or a Zoom meeting like we're doing now. You'll find other ways of doing it, and I think that there's certainly some really good advice around the way in which you can organise your instructional design that actually makes the most of the sorts of things you can only do face-to-face. You save those for video calls, and then you set things up so that students can be doing work, facilitated, but pretty much, self-directed as well.
Lots of teachers are also doing video, creating videos and things, which can take away from that too, can't it?
That's right, and it's still giving that the direct instruction for the students, and there's very quick and easy ways of doing it. All of the software that you're using, Google Hangouts and Zoom and Teams and whatever else you're using, all have the ability for you to make little quick short videos. Even your mobile phone, you can make them on those as well and upload them into whatever learning platform that you've got. But if that person wants to contact us directly, again, we're more than happy to give you some additional information on that as well. I think the next question was, what is happening with special schools during the pandemic? Have you heard anything, Amanda? Because I did a bit of ringing around today to get ready for this one.
Yeah, no, I haven't heard anything on that front at all.
So I rang the department and to get some information specifically for this question, and it wasn't they weren't helpful. They were. It's just I couldn't get anybody at the time because they were all flat out. They're all flat out being busy. So we will get an answer on that for that person. But I think what was really useful though is a colleague actually did send me some really useful tips from a fellow called Jake Miller. Jake is a technology integration specialist who works in education, and he came up with a whole lot of resources for assisting students with particular types of learning needs. So, things like accessibility, the accessibility functions on apps, which are really, really, I thought were just awesome. So I'll put the link to that article from the web into the ebook as well. But you can look him up. He's called jakemiller.net, Miller with an E. 10 tips for supporting students with special needs in remote learning. Now, here's I think he's probably from the US if they're talking about remote learning, but talks about very specifically how you can improve accessibility features on devices. So, speech to text, screen magnifiers, screen readers, just contrasting, high contrasting mode so that it inverts colours of the screen and the text, which can be probably helpful for a lot of us actually, not just students with particular learning needs, but also too, iPads and other types of tablets have got all sorts of things like predictive text, dictation, typing feedback, text replacements that can help look up things for you, assistive touch functions and so on, that are all actually part of the devices now. So you don't have to go and get new software for them. They already exist as part of the native software. So we'll put that link up because I think that's actually a useful thing that parents aren't necessarily aware of. The schools may not even be aware of it. Something someone would be, but there's some really neat features there that will be really useful, I think, for parents as well. Also, too, this is the very first VPC Live. We're going to be, while I think things are in this sort of, digital world, we're making the most of everybody getting on board and using the technology. So we're going to be having another one of these next week, same time, with Martine Oglethorpe. Martine is a digital parenting expert.
Yeah, she's fantastic, isn't she? I'm actually doing some work with her as well.
Yeah, well, it's great. Well, so we've had good chats with you. I've had good podcast chats with you. I've had good podcast chats with Martine as well. So that's going to be fun. So that's learning, living, and working, or working and living in the digital world. So that'll be a good conversation to be having as well. But I think at this stage, I think what we might do, Amanda, if there's any final tips and comments or takeaways, hopes, dreams that you'd like to leave people with tonight?
Well, as I said, really, I've highlighted throughout our conversation, do the best you can and we will all figure it out together.
We will. And my take on this is that it's going to be some really awesome stuff that we learn about each other, that we learn about our own capabilities as parents. And I think too, I'm welcome to Radical Parent Engagement 101. You're there living it, actually doing it now, in a very unique way. And I think there's going to be some wonderful things that you will notice and appreciate about the way in which your children learn, and notice and appreciate what your teachers, your children's teachers do as well. So I think on that note, we might say thank you for joining us. It's been great having you here tonight, Amanda. Always good to talk. We never ran out of things to talk about, do we?
No. I think we work very well together.
Me too. And thank you to everybody who's live online tonight. It was lovely to have you with us. We hope you've enjoyed this, and look out for the recording and also the ebook that we're going to put up on the website. Good night, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you to our guest speaker. We hope you enjoyed today's topic. Do you want to know more about this video and other VPC Live events? Please visit the Victorian Parents Council website, vicparentscouncil.vic.edu.au, and leave a review. We also welcome you to contact us if you would like to be our guest, or if you have a topic around parenting and education. Thank you to Melbourne singer Emma Sidney for her permission to use her soundtrack, Cherish. Until next time, thank you for listening.